In session 4 of our training, David will be talking about some of the protective measures your group should take when traveling. He'll also talk about surveillance and how to counter it should you find your group in that situation. Follow along in your listening guide and take notes on any of the points that you might like to go over as a group.
Now let's talk through some simple, basic security processes and procedures you could do when you're on the ground in the country you're visiting that make you harder to target for theft or any of these other issues. 3 basic rules of thumb, kind of got them highlighted right here. Stay alert, be unpredictable, and keep a low profile. TSA shows those, Homeland Security pops things like that up all the time, and I think after you've read it 400 times in the newspaper, it's like threat level orange, red, green, and blue. It means nothing. So I'll take just a second and talk about what does alert mean. I mean, you're going on a trip for 2 weeks, you're going to be alert every day. Was that a caffeine high thing? I mean, what is alert? I mean, nobody, you can't be alert forever because alert becomes normal, and then alert meaning more than normal. So what we're going to suggest is a shorter version. Be alert to change. That's easier to do. That's the 4th hijacking this week. That's the 4th car robbery this week. That's the 3rd person they're saying that this week has been assaulted while walking alone. Look for patterns and look for increases or changes in patterns. That's what really, it's more practical than just running around being alert. You could be so alert you never have time to stop and talk nicely to anybody. Just be alert to change. On the unpredictable, people who are unpredictable in terms of a little bit of time and schedule and things like that are harder to target. And we know that even in mission cases, at least half the time the victims were targeted. Somebody watched you for a while, they decided you were worth stealing from or doing this to, and then they went after you. And if they were watching you for a while, and well, today she left at 9, and then yesterday it was at 9:15, and yesterday she went this road, and today now he's down this road. Those kind of people are a lot harder to target than the person who at 9 o'clock, he comes out, he gets in his car, and he goes down the same road and parks in the same spot at the office. That I could set up and wait for an ambush. So unpredictable people are harder to pick on. My wife has got this one down. I mean, we don't even know what time we're going to get to church on Sunday, so nobody is going to get us. And I know I'm going to pay. There's going to be some terrorism at home when I get home for this one. This last one, this whole low profile, that is a cultural thing. When I say low profile, I don't mean go overseas and act like a low profile American. I mean go over there and try to blend in so you're a different skin color than them. So you're a different height than them. That's going to be an issue for a lot of us in a lot of countries. Whatever, you are still a lot of things you could do to just not be easily identified as American or as missionary and just kind of blend in. I mean, I was in Turkey at a time when things were a little tough, but there's also 500 German tourists there. Okay, I can blend there a little bit. So doing those things that keep me a low profile, how much information I put out about myself. Everybody in town doesn't point to where the American is staying and those things. Just who I talk to and how much I say that makes me not stand out if somebody came to town looking for trouble.
You're about to hear from some members of a short-term mission team from Arkansas who were serving in Tanzania when the group had to endure and witness an assault and robbery. They talk about the importance of being alert and taking protective measures on a trip.
When I glanced back down the hall and I saw that there were 2 men there, one with a machete and one with a gun. And they were coming down the hall. We got in the room, closed the door, and they hit our door. And Joe and I got it closed and bolted. It took both of us to do it. And when they couldn't get in there, they went to Carl and Kay's room.
And we heard them turn on Carl and Kay, and they basically chopped the door down. And Carl was pleading, of course, for them to leave them alone and ask them what they wanted. And then we heard a gunshot. And we waited just a short time and then went out in the hall. And they had already taken everything Carl and Kay had and left.
I wish there were some way to tell people and honest, actually know that they were comprehending it, that you need to be prepared. You need to stop and think about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
When you're on a mission trip, it's not a vacation. You're going there for a reason. You have a mission, and you're in spiritual warfare. And so Satan is going to throw everything he can at you to keep the mission from going the way it's supposed to go. And so your job is to stay alert and to keep your eyes out for whoever might be out there that could harm you, because it can happen, no matter where you are.
Avoid Western hangouts. When it gets to hotels and places like that, I mean, you've also, the German nightclub bombings and things. I mean, they targeted places where lots of soldiers hung out or Americans hung out. So I would tend, if I'm in a place where there's a little bit higher threat or risk, I'd look for a hotel or places that aren't where all the tourists hang out. Those aren't those. The bombings in Jordan clearly targeted at where Westerners stayed and that day and time. And you could predict that because there were only a few places in town where consistently most people staying there would have been tourists or folks from out of town. So consider avoiding those. And if you're really feeling unsafe, if you get into a situation where people are eyeballing you funny, it's a really high risk spot or things, there are other strategies you can do. And you have to be nice about them, but even asking for a new room when you get there. Particularly when you're in a country where there's a potential, organized stuff goes on, and the desk clerk may have told Uncle so-and-so that, we had Americans coming, and there have been cases where they've, pre-positioned people, and it's not a common thing. And I'm not telling you should go on every short-term trip and drive everybody nuts changing rooms. If I felt threatened, though, you got to pay attention to those little God-given intuitions. Asking for a new room. Politely, this one's not quite this, or the cockroaches aren't quite as big as his, could I have that, or whatever you got to say. But what you're really doing is you're making it hard for anybody who was making a plan. And if I'm going to be there for more than a couple of weeks sometimes, and I'm feeling like too many people in town are now knowing, changing rooms, switching into a different floor and things like that. And even if you have a choice, if your rooms are prearranged and you don't feel particularly threatened, you go with it. But when I have a choice, I'd avoid the first floor. The first floor is where the bombers go. That's where the drive-ins, they drive the car through the windows. The first floor is where people who want to shoot and get away. First floors are easier for people who want to take prisoners and get them out because you got lots of doors and windows. A little harder on second floor. You got staircases and things. And traditionally, anything above the 7th floor in a third world country, you're not going to get a lot of fire protection because they're getting our old generation fire equipment, and it tends not to go past 7 floors. So in a perfect world, you stay off the ground floor and things like that. Again, I'm not suggesting you make a nightmare for your team leaders. I'm suggesting if you felt a threat, there are things you can do. Even varying which hotel door you use, not coming and going the same ones. I wouldn't pop out in the dark alley, but thinking through that I'm not that predictable, and know your emergency phone numbers. I still run into people now and then that go, what's wrong with this country? My 911 won't work. Well, there's nothing wrong with the country. They just didn't plan their system. I was in a country where 911 gets you pizza, which is not a bad deal there, but because sometimes when I need pizza, it's an emergency, But you want to know what to call if you did need help. And there's a lot of evidence that carrying a cell phone makes you less vulnerable to crime because you give the impression that you might be able to call for help. Because who carries cell phones? Locals. Until recently with international phones. If you had a phone, it must mean you know how to use the local system. Even if you don't, carrying the phone sort of says that, okay? And it wouldn't be the first time I've gotten in a tight spot where pulling out the phone and talking to somebody who wasn't really there didn't just say to the guy that, I'm not all alone here and stranded, I have some other options. So knowing your phone and knowing how to use it. When it comes to lodging, be alert to loitering. We know that the majority of attacks, planned attacks against Westerners, mission personnel, in the majority, people were watched before the attack. So we'll talk more about that later in surveillance, but be aware that people standing around watching just too much, too long, pay attention to that sort of thing. Don't let strangers in your room. Well, of course, in America, some guy knocks on the door selling Tupperware and wants in my room at the hotel. Get out of here. This is my hotel. I'm on vacation. Overseas, people will open the door because I don't know the culture as well. I'm not sure if this is normal. You're selling, wow, spatulas, pampered somethings, come on in. And I mean, General Dozier in Italy let in the plumber when the plumber rings the bell and says, "Plumber here to fix your pipes." And his wife said, "We didn't call for a plumber. Don't let that guy in here." And he, "Oh, we don't want to offend him, be the ugly Americans." They let in the plumber, and then he, and you know, in all fairness, they left her alone and kidnapped him. So it did work out there. And he survived that thing, but she joked with him about that for some time after that. She was saying, "Buzzers are going off, don't do that." And he's thinking, very common thought, "I don't want to be offensive to people." Simple stuff on the street. I wouldn't walk the same path every day if I could. I'd change my route. I wouldn't take myself through the dark alleys and bad neighborhoods that I don't know anything about, but I would try not to follow the same road every day, and I'd walk facing traffic. I don't know if you've watched the news a few years ago, Al-Qaeda, they've gotten organized enough, they actually have training materials and manuals. One of their manuals was captured in Manchester, England, and translated and published. Specific instructions on how to kidnap people off the street, and what they were relying on was pulling up to people who were walking with traffic so they could pull just in front of them and open the door and force you to stop long enough to grab you. So walking facing traffic means they're going to have to hit me with the door, and I'm going to see them stopping and coming. Little stuff like that. Walk on the inside of the sidewalk. Al-Qaeda training manual again said, if you can, go for a target that walks on the outside. Because if I have to go on the inside, it takes me longer. You've got more chance to see me, more chance to run, more chance to scream, more chance to kick. So staying on the inside, or putting the ladies or the youngest or the smallest people to the inside, or the most obnoxious member of your team on the outside, whatever's working for you there. But you're safer on the inside of a sidewalk, statistically speaking. And then we're going to cover surveillance and the idea of kind of paying attention to pickpockets or people who are watching me a little too much, thinking about my purse or my wallet. We'll discuss that in more detail, but that's another thing we want to do while we're out there on the street. Carjack survival has become an issue. People dying accidentally because somebody wanted the car, and it's become a pretty violent thing in some parts of the world. Okay? Going to give you some simple clues on that one. Give up the car. Okay? I love my Prowler, but I wouldn't die for it. Okay? So I'm going to give them up the car, and I'll give up anything. I'm not going to say, just a minute, let me get my, okay, if it was Craftsman tools, I might beg for a minute, but they can have anything in the car too, because we know just from interviewing carjackers in America, the vast majority really were armed when they did this. They weren't bluffing. That wasn't their finger. They had a gun, and they said they had it so that people would take them serious. And we see people dying over cars because something they didn't appear to comply right or whatever. So here's what I'd suggest. When that guy's saying get out of the car, I would be what we call apparently obedient. And I'll go into more detail on apparently obedient. That's kind of a teenager concept, apparently obedient. But I'd be in an apparent, yes sir, you can have this car, that's not a problem. Staying calm helps. Screaming and crying, oh my goodness, generally doesn't calm this person down. So calm. I'd be collecting information. What does he look like? Any chance I can get a chance to get back, and I'd be looking for a chance to just take off running. Okay? Culturally, you need to think about what happens if they order me to get in the back seat or in the car, and it's cultural in different countries, and that's one of those things you ask the M's before you go. Is carjacking an issue? I mean, I've been to countries where nobody's stealing a car because they only had 4 and it'd get caught too quick. Okay? But there are places where it's very common and cultural. And culturally, in some countries, the average carjacker does make the victim get in the car for 10 minutes to make sure you don't have anti-theft devices. That's a pretty common thing in some South American countries. And 10 minutes later, they're going to kick you out of the car once they're convinced you don't have a engine shut-off switch. In other countries, like our own, what does it mean when a carjacker says, get in the car? It means the witness is going away and you're probably not coming back in our culture. Okay? Now I'm going to take my chances running and see if he can hit a moving target before I'll get in that car. Whereas in some of those other countries, I would, okay, this is common. He wants, okay, maybe that's not worth getting shot at. So I'd know my culture, I'd ask my sources, and I'd be thinking about it. But I'm not going to give this guy any reason to think that he needs to hurt me to get this car. Couple of other quick concepts. The mugger's wallet. A lot of countries where you got the mugger, quick assault, give me your wallet purse thing. You're not going to stop that. I wouldn't suggest you fight for a wallet. And so we'll suggest you I carry a second wallet overseas. I have my one I'm packing until I get to that place, and then I'm stashing that one in the safe or something at the hotel. And I carry a little dollar wallet with enough money to get me through the day and not enough to even be worrying about if somebody took it away from me. And so I carry that mugger's wallet. I call it a mugger's wallet. I knew a friend on Capitol Hill back in the 80s when the mugging thing was so common. He said by the 5th wallet, he didn't even stop. When the guy pulled out the gun and said, "Give me your," he just threw the wallet and kept going. And as long as they had $20 or more, there wasn't going to be anybody getting hit or anything because they needed something. If you didn't have anything, what does that mean? You're hiding, you're holding out. So a mugger's wallet.
The testimony you're about to hear is from Mindy Nance. Mindy was involved in a carjacking in Africa. She talks about the importance of staying calm and remaining apparently compliant in the situation.
Do what they ask you to do. If I would have jumped out of that car, it could have been worse. If I would have put it in reverse, I wouldn't have known that the 2 other gunmen were there and they could have shot right through the car. Do what they say. Don't go in hysterics. And that's something that the Lord gives you, I think, because I'm a hysterical person. And at that time, I just was calm. I was giving away things and making jokes. And I think that made me more real to them.
When it comes to lodging, if you have a choice overseas, another idea is the idea of a safe room. That's been an issue in countries where home invasion, home robberies are a problem. Some parts of Africa and some places where that's a fairly common thing. People burst into the home and hold you at gunpoint while they steal your stuff. The safe room concept is picking a room out in the place where I could retreat to and lock one more door to slow them down. Preferably that I take my phone with me in there, and preferable that they hear me calling on the phone, even if I'm not really, because that generally means they're going to limit their time and go if they have to go through another door. I know a fellow who installed a couple extra locks on his permanent residence in a place in Africa, and it wasn't within a few weeks of that incident, the family it was the bathroom. He figured they'd have running water and a steel door and locks. Family had to barricade themselves in there, and they were in there. They ended up spending 8 hours in there. They were in there when he came home from work. The house had been ransacked, but you know, the family was all still there. And the mom said it was really handy having a bathroom with 3 kids in there, okay? The rally point. We use that one all the time with short-term folks, long-term folks. We're all going to stay at this hotel for the next week. So what happens if the building catches fire, something far more common than an assault? We're all going to meet in a certain place in the parking lot or a certain place we're going to come together. The rally idea, a place that we've all pre-designed. If something happens in a crisis, we will meet so no one runs back into a burning building for no reason. That's come in handy too. We had a team in a country that was closed. The first guy was picked up and arrested. The others knew what that meant. Rather than go home and be arrested as well, they all went to the rally point, which is a restaurant that they had pre-planned, and they were able to avoid that situation and get a call home and let everybody know that these guys were arresting people on mock charges, and you know, that was back in the Taliban days. And then there's this third idea of a go kit. We have had a certain number of folks who ran into trouble because they saw trouble coming or they heard people pounding on their door, and they stopped to pack their belongings. Okay, got to grab my laptop and my valuables and my diary, and while they're packing, they're taken. So we're going to suggest you just keep the critical stuff in your backpack and just keep it all together instead of scattered around your room. And if we got to go, we're going to go. We're not going to wait for that stuff. We want to be the opposite of what these guys are looking for, and I'll tell you what they're looking for: soft targets. They're not heroes. These aren't brave warriors that they wouldn't be shooting at unarmed people, okay? These are thugs, and they're looking for a guy that's unarmed, unaware, that doesn't appear to shoot back. Short-term missionaries, generally we're not carrying a weapon and we're not going to shoot back and we're not that threat. Some of us are walking around with our head in the clouds, brand new country. That's what they're looking for, the person that looks like they're going to be able to get in, get what they want, and get out without a fight. What I prefer they saw was somebody whose body language said, hey, I'm paying attention. I'm alert, I'm confident, I'm looking at people. In some cultures I wouldn't make eye contact, ladies, but I'm still looking so people know that I see them. If they're coming after me, they know that I see them coming and I got a head up. I'd I make sure I'm a little tougher to get to with things like locking the door and staying on the second floor and things like that that make a harder target. I'd be unpredictable, particularly when I see changes in what's going on. You know, maybe for the next week or so, we're going to change things up. And I'd use things like alarms and security, locks and things. Number one security device in America is the age-old door lock. It's still the number one preventer of theft, and all the other high-tech stuff's great, but it's the simple stuff. If 4 guys in a row got their car locked and number 5 doesn't, guess who I'll pick? So just don't be the, we got a story in Idaho about the 2 guys that wound the grizzly bear, and they're taking off running. And at one point, hunter number 1 just stops and sits on a log and starts to take off his boots and put on his tennis shoes. And number 2 runs back and he says, "What are you doing, man? You're not going to outrun a grizzly bear with tennis shoes." And he looks up and he says, "Buddy, I don't have to outrun the grizzly bear. I just have to outrun you." I'm not going to be the softest target there, if you know what I mean. And I want my whole team to be in that boat. We're not going to be the softest target there.